Leadership is not about there. It's leadership is about what you do, the responsibility that you take, your values that drive you and define you, and ultimately that you can say, in some small way, I've made some small contribution to those around me. In many of the countries that I travel in Africa, where I spend a lot of time, what I see in those countries, which always for me is the lesson, I don't know how you articulate or communicate this lesson to our leaders in South Africa. And that is people in much harsher circumstances, with much less resources and opportunities and safety nets in the case of South Africa. They get on with it. They try and find a way of getting things done. They have to survive. There's no safety nets. In this country, despite everything that's wrong or that we're unhappy about, there's still so many safety nets. There's so many opportunities. And I think what I would say to you today is, if it's a challenge, that's an opportunity. If it's an opportunity, make it a challenge so that the opportunity is something bigger and better for you in whatever you decide to do. Be it that you want to run a big company, that you want to work in the NGO-sector, you want to be an academic, you want to be in a small town like Worcester and make a contribution in the local community. I take it that from an exposure point of view, integration point of view, Stellenbosch being part and parcel of real South Africa in terms of the issues confronting this country, that there are many more opportunities today for students compared to, say, 20, 30 years back. But at the time, in even that limited context, that was really something which in many ways also shaped my own thinking, etc. Training and travel. As a student, as I mentioned, really made an effort to travel, get exposure to things that maybe we were not exposed to in Stellenbosch. I don't know if he's still in Stellenbosch. At the time, the head of the Department of Political Science was Professor Henny Kotze, and he had this silly saying that if you want to experience the real South Africa, you must go to Elof Street in Johannesburg on a Saturday morning, and then walk up and down Dorp Street on a Saturday morning. That was his way of referencing Stellenbosch in terms of being elitist, most probably a little bit isolated from the bigger changes taking place in the country. Training, your career choices also influence about how you think about leadership. So in my space, obviously people like Consol Slabbert, would be someone that at least was, in my era, someone that people reference and refer to. But it's not necessarily about the big names. I think if you work in the non-profit world, it's not about people that make the front page news or people that do the big dinner speeches, etc. It's people that in a much smaller way make a difference regardless of circumstances, regardless of opportunities, regardless of resources. And most probably very sad and very unfortunate in this country, in the non-profit world, in the social justice world, South Africa comes from such a rich tradition of people, regardless of color, that made, regardless of circumstances, such a significant contribution in the 70s and 80s, regardless of restrictions. And many of those people, with the changes in the early and late 90s, either went into government or went into the private sector. And for a period of time, there was a big vacuum in the non-profit sector, in the social justice sector, because that whole leadership cadre was lost to the sector. Some people in their new positions, I think, continued to be very supportive of the work of the non-profit sector and being sensitive to the social justice issues confronting South Africa. At the same time, many of the people that were schooled in the sector, once they left, also obviously started doing things which, I don't think anyone can be proud of today. I really believe we can, not only in South Africa, globally, there's enough examples now. Countries like Germany with 20, 30, 40% of their energy generation is from alternative sources. Now, if countries that don't have wind and don't have sun like South Africa can do it, we can do so much more. And I think it's both an advocacy issue, it is a very practical, common sense issue, evidence is clearly there. It's a business opportunity in terms of job creation and green and clean jobs. It's obviously an environmental issue, a climate change issue. So on so many levels, it is, even if you talk about solar as just about solar, it cuts across so many of the issues that impacts on all of us. We've got schools in this country that don't have electricity. We've got health clinics that don't have electricity. You know, if you, it's not, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out that actually those places and spaces can be helped with, say, a very simple intervention. The fact that it has almost taken the Eskom fiasco for us to, on a high level, to have more discussion and debate about solar in a country that have all the opportunities is almost criminal as far as I'm concerned. And the millions and billions that we're still spending and will continue to spend on old, dirty energy, I think it's very sad. It's very sad. But now because we didn't plan it, now we're in this almost contradiction that we have to kind of stick to the old model to try and fix the old model because the new model is not far advanced enough to be a real alternative. But I think where you do see initiatives where people are allowed to get independent providers of energy onto the national grid, even if it's forced because of the Eskom scenario, it's great. It's great. You know, they fill a gap. Hopefully, it sets an example. It's a reference point for others to think about, both on a practical as well as on a policy level. And hopefully, that's part of making the shift. But as we all know, climate change, alternative energy, it doesn't help if South Africa or the US or Japan or Germany does something. There's also a bigger collective approach required to change some of the climate change trends. And, you know, the big UN conference in October, November this year in Paris will obviously set the scene for the next 20, 30, 50 years. So if there's no agreement in Paris this year, then I think we are in serious trouble. At least there's some good signs that the leaders want to come up with a good compromise. Compromise is probably the wrong word, but an agreement that can set some new rules and new targets for around the environment.